Welcome to the Belonging Project podcast. This is Fiorenza and I'm your host. The purpose of this podcast is to bring voices together to talk about belonging. Through inspiring real-life conversations, we explore how belonging can show up in so many different ways, what it feels like to belong, and the impact of truly belonging. Each episode will offer you inspiration and practical strategies to find your true voice in your life and as a leader. Let's dive in. Hi, and welcome to the Belonging Project podcast. Today, I'm with Laura Howard, and I'm so excited to be having this conversation today about female leadership and belonging and how it intersects. Hi, Laura.
Hello. Hi, Fiorenza. It's great to be on your Belonging Project podcast. Thank you for having me on. I'm equally excited to have this conversation with you and your listeners.
Thank you so much. Laura, what about we get started with a little bit about you, and would you like to tell our listeners what you do?
Yeah. Perhaps I'll go backwards slightly and begin with my former career and how that leapt me forward to where I am presently. I spent a long career, well over 10 years, leading a complex and multidisciplinary team in professional services here in the Midlands of the UK, where I'm based and still based today. And that career was fascinating. It took me places across the world. It accelerated my leadership skills to propel our services and the individuals within my team. It was, as many of your listeners will appreciate, it was a very intense and long hours, lots of stress and pressures, all those complexities of handling that job at that level. And a few years into that position, I became a mother to my two amazing girls and begun to have this feeling deep in my gut that whilst I may have had a great job title, I may have had some decent money coming in each month, but there was a gap. There was something deeply missing there, which meant I didn't feel wholly fulfilled or motivated to do what was really my deep purpose in my work here. Fast forward to the COVID years, and at the same time, the UK's exit from the European Union occurred, meaning that formal Brexit proceedings had been implemented after a long sort of negotiation, if you can think back to that, which meant my career, having been in international trade professional services, collapsed. So all of a sudden, this career that I'd put so much weight and effort into disappeared and left me feeling a little lost, a little empty. I knew, of course, that I deeply cared for and loved my family. And these two sort of things were happening across the universe to bring me back, I think, to an equilibrium, which meant at the same week that my job became redundant, I discovered this master's program in organisational psychology. So cut a long story short, I retrained to become a specialist in behaviour across businesses. And within that training, I discovered a whole new discipline in female leadership. And I know we'll get into that shortly. So today I use this discipline and the research that I've embraced through my new career and my new platform. I can combine my lived experiences of all the hurdles and difficulties that I experienced in that senior career over the last 10 years to now support women in leadership through one-to-one executive coaching to help them discover what it is that they want from their careers, and that in fact they can absolutely make that happen. There's no barriers to confidence. I help them overcome each of each of these things. And in fact, that there's nothing indeed wrong with us as female leaders, because we often internalize some of these environmental barriers and difficulties, when not measuring up. Well, the standards that women are put under are much higher than those of our male counterparts, for example. Helping women to understand indeed that there's nothing wrong with them. In fact, quite the opposite. We're phenomenal in the workplace is deeply embedded in what I do today.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura, for sharing not just how you're helping, but also the journey, your journey. And certainly I hear that there's been experience on the ground that you're able to apply in your work now, but also perhaps that is helping you resonate with the issues, the challenges, the situations that people, your clients, are bringing to you. And I think that's quite important when you can feel what they're feeling. And, of course, we can have those feelings and empathize in many different ways. But like you, I think that there is that extra value when it can be a situation that you've stepped in yourself or that you've overcome yourself to serve better in those situations, for sure. You've mentioned confidence being one barriers that female leaders bring to the work you do with them. Does it always come up? Does it come up more than it doesn't? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary that you gave, Fiorenza. Yeah, it comes up more than it doesn't, I would say. And different issues that relate to confidence. So, for example, women leaders recognising their value and their worth in their organisation, and how to take credit and recognition for the important work that they do. These are some other common issues that I will regularly work through with my clients to help them realise just how deeply valuable they are and learn to accept recognition and praise much more readily in their workplace to help build their influence and their career through some of these techniques.
What would you say tend to be the fundamental differences between a female leader and a male leader?
Well, let me tell you a little bit about my research, if this is a good time to do that. It's perfect. In 2022, I conducted a study where I interviewed other female leaders at C-suite level and head of department level in my region, in the Midlands, also in professional business services. And I was interested to investigate how these female leaders, how these women developed their own sense of leadership authenticity. And when I spoke a few minutes ago about purpose, so this word authenticity, I found speaks to the women leaders in particular discovering their unique sense of purpose and belonging in many instances to their work. So what my research uncovered uniquely for these women that I interviewed as part of my work were that they were struggling to recognise their belonging, and they held this as deeply significant as a key driver for their motivation at work. So, for example, one woman that I interviewed, she had difficulty reconciling that in her practice, in her organisation, she would recognise across the boardroom table that there was like one-upmanship happening, these sort of dirty tricks happening, calling out mistakes in a non-safe way, blaming people, this competitiveness, this overriding target and cheating behaviours, we call them sometimes. And this was happening across the boardroom with a male majority organisation. But she didn't feel that she could call it out, and she didn't feel that she had any influence if indeed she would call this behaviour out. instead preferring to either join in or remain silent when this behaviour was happening in the workplace. So that was one unique case of where that particular person, she didn't feel able to make a difference, use her sole voice to make a difference to the organisation. So that was one sort of key finding. As I suggested earlier, previously published research suggests that women are often held to a higher standard than men in leadership. And this feeds a woman's sense of imposter. And I know you've had a guest on recently about this important topic. So this sense that women are held to a higher standard than men feeds a perpetual cycle that I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough. Whereas in fact they adequately are, and more so, but the expectation of our society and workplaces overburden women with different standards.
This is definitely something that I'm seeing in my work as well. Female leaders saying that they're being held to a different standard. What do you typically tend to see as the reasons for this? Is it solely based on, the historical societal roles that we have associated to genders, or is there more? Could it be related to industry, the culture we live in, the culture of the organization? What do you see as being the main factors for this?
That's a great question. So historically, the research suggests that there's an incongruity between women and leadership. So when we talk about leadership, everyone has their own unique perspective of what a great leader is. Whereas Absolutely. If I said to you, describe me a car, Fiorenza, we'd largely agree that it has 4 wheels, 5 doors in many instances, a steering wheel, for example. We'd largely agree. But if you get a room full of people and ask them what great leadership is, there will be some similarities, but often great differences. Traditionally, the male has been held in strong regard in terms of leadership positions through our history. And this is where the incongruity theory has emerged. So particularly when women apply for promotions, we're seen as nurturing and collective in our inherent behaviours, coming back to that historical perspective, whereas men are seen as agentic and decisive. So it's marrying the role with those outdated historical norms, which still are left over, sadly, in recent times. Now, the narrative is changing, obviously, but some data from the UN suggests that it'll be over 100 years until men and women have equity across all areas of work and society. And we see that, of course, through the gender pay gap, which is highest for more senior roles, looking at the Office for National Statistics data, which of course is worrying because we want to see more women in senior roles. We know that more equitable leadership teams of organisations have better overall well-being, make better overall decisions and experience greater performance.
A few points perhaps that we could explore and unpack further. There is progress, right? So the more we move into the newer generations and the more equity perhaps we can find within organization, within roles, even with the complex issue of the gender pay gap. And of course, we're hoping here, without going too much into politics, but we're hoping that all that has been fought for so many decades, if not more, is not going to be, it is not going to get undone. So there's still hoping. And I think we do see some organization being more forward thinking and pushing for equity with pay, but also with culture, having a culture of equity, because I do think that, yes, of course, the gender pay gap is huge and needs to be addressed, but there's also a culture. The culture of the organization matters. And is that actually fostering equity, or is it just talk, but actually there is nothing that is really happening? What message is the top leadership sending to their teams, to the juniors, right? To the junior women that are just joining. What are they looking up to? Are there others like them in senior roles that they can look up to? How accessible are they? Can they have mentors? All that sort of things. And there is perhaps, as I'm looking at my mom mug that I happen to have.
Brilliant.
It wasn't, planned like that. I have a few of those. Motherhood often happens when you get perhaps to the mid-career point, if it's something that, someone chooses to. And often it's seen to be as an obstacle or a stop point, right, in a woman's career progression. An obstacle or something that the organization, the industry, just work is holding against us, right? We have to justify a gap if we are taking a leave of absence. And even if we are not taking, a big leave of absence, we're just talking about a few months, we still may feel that we are lagging behind our male colleagues. Yes. So I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you. Yeah, you've hit on some major issues which continue to prevail in some companies. And of course, the UK is behind its European neighbours on things like paternity leave as well, which we can't leave out of this critical debate, because good work design, good policy design across organisations benefits everybody, not just the group that it might have discreetly been uniquely invented for. Some organisations are really good at this. So Vodafone, for example, I don't know if this is still the case, but certainly in recent years, invite their returning mothers to work 4 days a week for no change in pay for the first several months, for a period of adjustment and support. Because we know, and your listeners will appreciate, that Pregnant Then Screwed reported that motherhood is the equivalent of 2.4 full-time jobs. So we have to get real. We have to get efficient. We have to get skillful and decisive to make our paid work work. Okay, so that's critical to recognise the unique skills and contribution that this group that we talk about deliver to the workplace, and to not beat ourselves up about working flexibly or doing condensed hours or whatever it is that we're choosing to do to give our families the lifestyle and the income whilst we still have a cost of living crisis and all these external factors and all this judgment that the organisations and other parents can be very critical of ourselves. Lots to continue to work on. And what I discovered recently was a study that spoke about female belonging in the workplace and how things like open culture that you spoke about, psychological safety, flexible working policies, documented and transparent working policies were critical to this group in this study, to feeling this sense of belonging and purpose within their workplace is critical to unlocking direction and motivation for this group in this study. So those are all really important things for progressive workplaces, and this study pointed to a volume of this to improve work design for this group, but also everyone.
The everyone point is really so important. Really want to underline that because everyone benefits from this, right? It's not just about women, really. And I think I'm always amazed to see those topics, psychological safety, belonging, feeling welcome to express ideas, opinions. When all those topics come up in my work with men, right, I have this little internal light that comes on. I'm like, yay, It really matters, and it is for everyone. And just coming back to the motherhood point a second, I think society has for too long probably made us hold this belief that you can't be a caregiver, you can't be a parent, and at the same time a leader, right? It's mutually exclusive, but actually it's not, right? And it's not, but I think we are still early days in terms of showing to society, to the world, that it's actually possible to have both. And we are probably the second generation into showing that it's possible, making it work somehow, right? And for sure, for the first generation, it was, working. If it was working out for you and the family, you probably had some form of support, right? You had to. And perhaps now with our generation and great work, like Pregnant and Screwed and, other organizations like that are advocating for more flexible hours, work arrangements, but also organizations that are fostering that. It's getting possible on more equitable terms, but also in ways that are not leading to burnout. I think that's quite important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to share a story with you all. A few months ago, I was in London for celebration and conference for my industry. And I discovered outside of the coffee shop where we were sort of culminating the CEO of an organisation that I know. And she was on FaceTime to her young son. Her husband was at home caring for the two boys, and the CEO was, clearly in work mode, but conflicted. On FaceTime, I recognised that there was a young voice that was a bit upset that mummy wasn't there and was feeling unwell. And I just said, "You're doing great. This is so hard. Well done. Everything's going to be okay. You've got this covered." And that doesn't cost anything. That was just a human to human connection. Yes, I did that as someone that's got a senior career behind me and a mother. If a father were to do that to her, that would really demonstrate, semi-publicly that we're all doing this together. When my husband leaves work early each week because he takes my daughter to her gymnastics class, everyone should be aware of that and it recognise that it's part of the human fabric of what we're all doing here, and not a weakness because we're somehow less of a worker because we have a commitment within our family unit as well.
What elements do we need to belong when we are women and we are in a position of leadership? What's helpful?
So the major outcome of some of the research is to have visible role models for the types of behaviours that we resonate with, the types of values that we can recognise. So this speaks to what you were saying earlier in terms of some juniors coming into the organisation. What positive role models can we see for transparency and progression of one's careers on our own terms? We don't have to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week to achieve this. One of my participants was in the accountancy practice in my study and remembers going out for a drink with one of the partners of the business. And the partner said, "Oh, it would be great to have you rise up the ranks. It would be great to have more women at partner level of this firm." But then at the same time, this was someone that my participants saw as being quite the reverse of authentic and themselves at work, and trying to step into that masculinity that was the dominant energy across the organisation in order to fit in. So role models who can be unapologetically themselves and quite open and vulnerable is a critical takeaway. One of the other takeaways was to develop and build a business case for equity and open, authentic leadership styles. Recognise the more measurable business outcomes that companies look to, the profitability, the results, the reputation of the company. The other benefit was, the other takeaway was to have an education, and you've mentioned this through mentoring, for example. So through improved educational and growing self-awareness of all leaders across the business, and the women, so we can appreciate that we are indeed deeply flawed, but the system in which we're operating, the environment, has a number of precursors and challenges inherent to its setup, which mean we just might have to do things a little differently to how we traditionally have done. If you've read the book, The Authority Gap, Fiorenza, have you read that?
Yes, I did.
Did you like it?
I liked it, yes.
So Marianne Segar talks about how girls at school are conditioned to raise their hand, to be polite, to work diligently. Whereas conversely, boys are rewarded for competitive behaviour, for being outspoken, and all these sorts of family of behaviours. And when women get to the workplace, we think that if we work diligently, we crack on with our outcomes and our activities, that will automatically be rewarded and recognised. And we know that in the real world, it's a bit more complex than this conditioning that we've previously had in our younger years. So these are some of the sort of systematic occurrences that I talk through with my clients to help them see a different perspective.
Is there a success story that you could share with us? Someone that you've worked with and that you've seen the change happen through the work you did together?
Yeah, my favourite one is from recently, when the client was very hesitant to embark on new projects. She recognised that she might have a contribution to make, but yet there was something holding her back. She was very reticent to volunteer to her CEO, which she felt was this. She'd put him up on a pedestal as a technical know-how, deeply intelligent, deeply standoffish. She'd created that persona. But when she started to work with him and volunteer for these significant projects, all of a sudden, the profile of her work publicly and within the business grew exponentially. So she was more motivated, she was more creative, she was more driven, and she received a pay rise to her credit and her satisfaction, as well as a consequence of this new action, this empowerment that she'd grown into.
It's such a honor to witness the transformation when we work with someone and see some obstacles being overcome. It's very rewarding. I think you'd agree with that.
Yeah, it's a real privilege as well, because I think how differently my career would have been in my late 20s and 30s if I'd have recognised that the world of work isn't necessarily structured to support women, as opposed to my natural default was, I must be problematic, I must be flawed, I must not be working hard enough, I must not be focused enough, instead of recognising the bigger picture.
And I think, when we work as an external coach, with women that are facing those challenges or having those feelings. It's sometimes providing, at least that's what I'm finding, it's providing a lifeline at times, in the sense that there is someone external that you can be open and transparent about all this stuff. You can just, express it, right? And there's no shame, there is no consequences. They can be honest and free to have this hard chat. For organizations that pride themselves with transparency and openness, and when sometimes the coach hat is being worn by their manager, it's difficult to open up in this way.
Yeah, it is.
And sometimes you don't want to.
Yeah, exactly. You can have all the psychological safety in the world, but and lots of businesses do, and with well-intentioned internal training, so that managers can take a coaching approach. But principally, there's a power dynamic. And that's very difficult to move aside from. Also, in my studies, I've investigated informal mentoring, where you find someone that you trust and support inside or outside of your organisation, because, of course, coaching might not always be available for lots of reasons, financial being one of them. So in some of my other work, I've advocated for discovering an informal mentor, someone that you trust and can open up to, and still have that objective, safe conversation about what's going on for you, to help you access different ideas to do things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura, for this conversation. I really enjoyed unpacking those topics with you and having you here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I've loved it. Thank you for making me feel so at home and welcome.
Thanks, Laura. You can follow the podcast on LinkedIn at the Belonging Project Podcast. You can also hit subscribe and stay up to date with our episodes. And do feel free to get in touch with me on coaching@fiorenzarossini.com. Thank you again, and see you next time.